Go ahead and broadcast, see who's joining us. Hello, hello. Awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and promote. Let me see, Sarah, if we can make you a panelist, since you may know folks joining us today. Hey, Sarah, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, good, good. So I was going to say, we can also, this is a way we could bring everybody in if we want to also. You can let me know.
You said to
But
bring everyone in how? Sorry about that. I stepped away
yeah,
for a moment.
no problem. Just like this, and maybe those of you who are just joining us now, you could go ahead and just introduce yourself in the chat, share your name, share what grade levels you work with, where you're based. And I'm realizing when we get to the Q&A portion, we could even, we could change the settings here so that we can hear from more people, either see you all or at least be able to hear you. And this session is being recorded so that we can share with some of our colleagues. And hopefully we'll be interactive. So, I'm Fareed from the Pulitzer Center, work in the education department here, and I'm based in DC. But before working here, I taught middle school, so 6th through 8th Spanish. I'm joined by my colleague, Joya. Hi, Joya.
Hi, Fareed. Hi, Sarah. Nice to meet you. And hi, everybody else. My name is Joya Mukherjee. I'm based in Chicago, and I'm joining you from my apartment in the city. Before I joined this organization, I worked in literacy and also special education at the elementary level.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, everybody. And I see in the chat here, we've got a community joining us from DC, third grade teacher from Amadon Boehm. Hey, welcome. Welcome, Damien from John Burroughs. Jeff joining us from Miami. Mirala in Romania. Good to see you, Mirala. Excellent. And Sarah, is there anything you wanted to say before we start? We're so excited to be putting on this session in partnership with you all at the Washington Teachers Union.
Yes, I'm so excited too. And hopefully this is the beginning of an even more robust partnership. But for those of you who have joined us today from WTU and from Romania, thank you so much for extending your efforts well outside of the school day to enhance the learning and amplify the voices of our young people. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think we'll go ahead and get started. Our hope today is to introduce you to a writing contest that closes this week, but it's also a workshop that we have led for students and could lead in your classes or pass on for you to share with your colleagues in your classes, even beyond when we close out the contest this week. So here's our plan for the next little under an hour. We're going to start with a quick introduction to the Pulitzer Center where Joya and I work. We're going to talk through the local letters contest structure so students that you work with can submit if they'd like to. And then what we're going to do is actually experience, as if we were students, what it's like to try out the structures of this contest for ourselves, and then close with some time for us to look at reporting on our own and to plan a letter as a community. Our primary goal today is just that everyone take care of yourselves and each other. So we'll hopefully stay respectful and supportive in the chat, and also for ourselves. Also, I know many of us on the call today are spending more time in front of screens than maybe we're used to, so or would like to. So please take care of yourself, stand up, move away from your screen if you need to. We want you to feel supported throughout the session. So we are in Zoom webinar right now, which means that as you can see here, your video and audio are turned off for now. With our group today, we think if we get to the Q&A and some of you are willing to read some of what's on the screen, or if you want to unmute to ask a question, we can actually change the setting for you to be able to unmute. So we'll do that in a moment. But also throughout, you can use the chat box to communicate with each other. Just make sure that you have the blue bar above where you're typing set to all panelists and attendees. And so what we're going to start with is just a quick intro to the Pulitzer Center. I'm recognizing some of the names here, so some of you might know a little bit about us. But briefly, we are a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to essentially support engagement with underreported stories, and we do that by supporting news. So we give grants directly to journalists, and those grants are ideally supporting stories that are underreported. And when I say the language underreported, what I mean is a story that's not getting a lot of attention. So sometimes this is a slide we'll often use with students to start the conversation about what's the difference between an underreported story and something that we would call breaking news. We might even start by asking students where they're getting their information. So I'm actually curious for this group who's here today, drop in the chat if I were to ask you, what are some of the things that you're feeling or that you're hearing about the most in the news right now, maybe even in the last week? What are some of those topics? Go ahead and drop them in the chat. Sarah mentions the election. Hey, Ms. Gibson. Yes, Ms. Gibson mentions the election as well. Brittany as well. The increase in COVID cases mentions Tareka. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Please accept my apologies if I haven't. And what's interesting when I look at these topics, especially seeing that some of us are using the same or mentioning the same topics, maybe we're hearing some of these topics from our students. Often these are the kinds of stories that we would qualify as breaking news. Outlets, whether they're online, whether they are on TV or print, especially as more and more outlets that are starting to publish online are trying to get to the stories quicker and get us information quickly. What can happen is that we'll see many, many stories, even many angles on a similar subject. And what can get lost are these underreported issues, these issues that often are connected to systemic issues, things that last over time. So the Pulitzer Center supports these underreported stories by giving grants directly to journalists. And part of the deal is then we are able to not only support them in publishing in the outlets they work with, and last year we worked with over 125 news outlets, but also we publish those stories, a version of them on our site, so anybody can access them, even if they don't have a subscription to that publication. So to give you a glimpse at some of these stories, and also a resource you can share with your students to explain what an underreported story is, let's take a look at this short video.
Hi, I'm Steve Sapienza.
And I'm Nora Moraga Louie. We're members of the editorial team at the Pulitzer Center.
And we're here to talk about underreported stories, why they matter, and how you find them.
An underreported story covers an issue that is important, but isn't getting the attention it deserves.
These can be stories that aren't necessarily in the breaking news headlines, or they're covered, but missing critical perspectives and nuance.
Underreported stories, they're underreported for reasons. It usually has to do with our agenda setting.
It's driven by clicks and news cycles around things like disasters and elections. Of course, that doesn't tell the whole story about the world.
These are stories that can save lives. For example, we now know that there was far less coverage of the coronavirus issue in the first weeks of 2020 than we should have had, given what epidemiologists knew at the time. The last time there was a pandemic, in 1918, the same thing happened. The flu claimed millions of lives, but the virus barely made the front page because most news coverage focused on World War I.
Underreported stories raise awareness about issues we know little about. Reading them makes you a smarter citizen, better able to make informed decisions and useful contributions to society.
They also illuminate the deeper issues that we face as a society. They help us build empathy, expose corruption, hold the powerful accountable, find solutions to difficult problems, and affect change.
So this video goes on to share some examples. We're going to be looking at a lot of examples in our workshop today. So I'll skip this section, but I did want to show you that as we are supporting these journalists, we're seeing news stories, underreported issues being reported in many different places. These are some of the outlets our grantees have worked with over the past 15 years that we've been around. And because these stories are often coming from journalists and news outlets, as things that they are passionate about and have researched for a long time, they range, and especially they range depending on the place in the world they're looking at and the place that they're publishing. So these are some of the topics that our grantees are covering, everything from food insecurity, land and property rights, health, politics and governance, to climate change, conflict and peace building, civil asset forfeiture, racial justice, and the experiences of children, youth, and people of all genders across the world. So before we start looking at some reporting, we were curious to know a little bit about the issues that, and you can answer for yourselves or your students, what are some of the global issues that are important to you in your community? Environment and climate change, migration and refugees, racial justice, health and COVID-19. And if it's another issue here, you want to highlight an underreported issue that's not mentioned, just drop it in the chat. We'd love to see what issues you and your students are interested in. And I will go ahead and close this poll in 3, 2, 1. And I see a real mix of interests here, which is exciting because we're going to explore a workshop that's all about exploring your interests. So I think this will be useful for everybody here. And I appreciate seeing in the chat issues related to racial justice, killing, food security as well. So that's good to know. When we get to this part of our workshop where we are exploring reporting on our own, let's make sure we get to some reporting that highlights those issues. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Joya here, because to elevate an underreported issue, we can't just stop with us supporting the journalism. We also have an education and outreach mission.
Hi, thank you so much, Fareed. The unique mission of our education department is to cultivate a more curious, informed, empathetic, and engaged public by connecting students and teachers with underreported global news stories and the journalists who cover them. We uphold that mission in a number of ways, and I'm going to show you in the next slide. And so we support teachers and students with a number of educational programs and resources. We first and foremost have thousands of articles, photos, and videos on underreported issues for students and teachers to explore on our website. A unique feature that our organization offers students and teachers is our lesson builder, which has hundreds and hundreds of lesson plans related to the reporting. And all of those lesson plans are standard aligned and available for the K-12 setting as well as a university setting. A unique program that we offer is virtual journalist visits. Our virtual journalist visits offer students and teachers the opportunity to connect with journalists who can speak about a range of topics, which might include their experience and their journey as a journalist, their reporting skill and style, or the content of their reporting projects, the global issues that they cover. And finally, we offer workshops for students and teachers year-round. One of our unique features that we talked about in the last slide is our lesson builder. And I want to take a couple of slides to identify really the range and the diversity of the lesson plans that we offer teachers. So this is just a curation of lesson plans that explore global and local issues. And we have there's way more where that came from on our lesson builder. Let's go to the next slide. We also have a number of lesson plans that explore journalism skills. This particular set is our Journalist Toolbox set, and it includes videos and skill building activities for students who are interested in exploring media literacy skills and journalism skills. And finally, we offer contests, writing contests for students in the fall and spring semester. And our spring semester contest is Fighting Words, which is a poetry contest. And of course, we have our fall contest, which is Local Letters for Global Change, which is essentially a persuasive writing letter contest. And that's the contest that we're going to focus on today.
Part of why we thought we would focus on this contest today is because the whole point of this is to ask students to identify an issue they care about, use their own research through engagement with news stories to explore that issue in more detail, and then to write a letter explaining why that issue matters to them and what they think a member of elected office should do about it. So those are those 3 parts listed here, the guidelines for students. We start with a summary. An explanation of how this issue connects to your community, and then finally the action that you want the representative to take. Hey, Joy, do you mind muting for a second? I think there might be an echo. All right, I think that did it. Great. So the cool thing about this for students is not only will their letters that they submit be considered for publication on our website with a bio, which would be great for their resumes, and also get their voices out to a larger audience. Second, they'll have a letter that they could send to an elected official and potentially get some action taken on an issue they care about. Third, they will actually win for the top 3 finalists, they will win $100 for their class. So the money would be distributed to the teacher for the student and teacher to decide together how they want to celebrate engagement with these important issues through writing. The deadline for this contest is this Friday at midnight. However, we know that you're getting this webinar right before the deadline. So you can just let us know in the chat or at the end of this session, we'll put an email in here that you can use to let us know if you want a little more time. We're probably going to give some schools who have notified us an extension through next Monday. So this is what it looks like when the finalists and the 3 winners, last year we had 10 finalists and 3 winners, but it kind of depends based on the year. This is what it looks like when we post their letters. And I wanted you to see it because you can see that the topics students are drawn to really vary. So among our winners last year, we had a high school student who was interested in education equity, middle school student interested in climate change. I'm based in North Carolina. Our elementary school winner was interested in the opioid epidemic, and she wrote to Representative Kamala Harris. Among our finalists, you see that, again, a range of issues and locations. The thing is, too, I noticed that a lot of the finalists last year chose to write letters to a representative or senator, but your student, based on the issue they explore, they can identify who they think would make the change they want to make and write the letter to that person. Maybe it's your principal, maybe it's a member of the school board. We definitely want to encourage students to not use their analysis to also identify the right person to write their letters to. So what we're going to do now is evaluate a letter and then practice planning our own. And to evaluate, before we look at a piece of student work and evaluate it, we want to show you the reporting that this student used and identified as interesting to her. So let's take a look at the opening text for this reporting, and then we're going to look at some photography from that reporting. Joy, could you read the opening text for us? And all of us, let's use the chat to identify what are some of the global issues that this piece of reporting is bringing up.
Climate change and human trafficking in Indonesia. Palm oil production is one of Indonesia's biggest industries, supplying almost half of the world and driving massive deforestation on the archipelago. In addition, Indonesia's large population, agricultural land use practices, deforestation, and coal consumption make it a high greenhouse gas emitter. To make way for commercial logging interests, Indonesia's indigenous people were forced 50 years ago to migrate into the country's peatlands. Frequent heat waves and unpredictable weather make peatlands prone to wildfires, threatening their indigenous inhabitants. With few government protections, indigenous groups have nowhere else to go and are vulnerable to lung disease caused by exposure to heavy smog produced by the palm mills, while indigenous women, desperate to leave, are often preyed upon by human traffickers. In this project, Zaisha Bakani reports on the environmental and social challenges facing indigenous people working on Indonesia's palm plantations.
So start to add to the chat. There's a lot packed into this text right here. What are some of the issues that this journalist is identifying? And for those of us who are more visual learners, we're also going to look at some photography that this journalist used to tell this story. Here we see the caption, palm oil plantations occupy about 1.9 million hectares of land in Riau. Santi takes a bath in the murky water with a neighbor while her mother Ida washes their clothes. The reservoir is the community's only source of water. Palm oil workers meet to discuss their work conditions in the plantation. We see that all of these were taken in Indonesia by Zaisha Cruz Bakani in 2018. So let's look at the chat here. What are some of the issues that have been identified in this reporting? Joy, what are we seeing?
I'm sorry, Fareed. So Sarah's sharing with us displacement and exploitation of indigenous populations in Indonesia. That is certainly a global issue that is explored in this reporting. Do we have any others that we can identify? Tarika has shared global change causing heat change and unexpected weather patterns. Certainly, that is accurate. Thank you for sharing, Tarika. Brittany has shared palm oil production and the impact it has on indigenous groups. Environmental includes impact on health and their physical environment. Social, which includes exploitation of indigenous groups for the production of palm oil. And then Carletta adds economic sustainability for the community and access to resources. Thank you so much for all these fantastic contributions. Co-Watts Dixon shares the exploitation of indigenous people. Agreed. Thank you so much for sharing. We also have, yes, we have so many great attendees that are sharing and identifying some of these global issues.
At this point, what we would ask the student to do is, based on these issues you've identified, which is the one that is really sticking with you? And what are some of the details that you might pull out of that reporting to explain this issue to somebody who doesn't know anything about it? So for example, something that was really sticking with me was some of it was the image of the dirty water in contrast to what we were learning in the text about the impact of the pollution on the water. So that's maybe a detail I would add in my letter. The next thing that you would do is think about why this issue, the one that you identified of this list we made, why does that matter to you in your own community? How does this issue that is happening in Indonesia connect to something you see where you're based? Carletta makes a really good point. It's their only water source. That was in the caption there. That's scary and a hard reality to deal with. Carletta, it makes me think, I'm based in DC, and I'm remembering that when I feel like it was a few years ago that there were some questions. There were some of the school buildings that were being checked for lead, especially after we were learning about the way that lead was in different being found in different communities around the US. That I remember that being a sort of concern here in DC where I live as well, which made me think about that image. Tareka's making that connection. Yes, the connection to Flint could be a connection here. So that, oh yes. Buildings were closing off water fountains for a few weeks. I remember that. So this might be, the water issue might be one that feels a connection to you or to your students. I know, Joya, you're based in Chicago. Is there a connection that you were finding to this story?
I think that I was really struck, and it was shared in the chat as well, all of the consequences of the environmental impact of pollution. And I think you also mentioned that earlier. And that actually connects to a burgeoning interest of mine, is the connection between our economy and the impact it has on pollution.
So once we've made these connections, the last thing we would do is think of the action. We want someone to take. Who is that person? What action do we want them to take? And then we'll add that into our letter. Pretty simple. So what we're going to do now is take a look at how a student put this letter together using those three elements. And I just wanted to quickly highlight that at the contest page, pulitzercenter.org/local letters, we've even included a graphic organizer for students where they can start to draft their letter in advance. Isabel is the person who chose this letter. She's based in Ohio. And let's take a look at her letter and figure out what parts of the contest she's hitting in different paragraphs here. And yes, Carletta, we're going to send in this slideshow and the contest information in a follow-up email. We'll also make sure you're connected to Sarah for your PLU credits. So maybe Joya, do you mind reading the first paragraph here? And then we will try to figure out what Isabel is trying to do with this paragraph. And if anyone else is willing to read, just drop your name in the chat and I can change the setting for you to unmute. Excellent, Carletta. We'll have you read next. Thank you.
Dear Senator Sherrod Brown, it is impossible to ignore the devastating effects that humans have on the earth. So we must stand together to protect this once beautiful planet and its inhabitants. I believe that change should start by terminating the usage of Indonesian and Malaysian palm oil, a horrendously common soap, cosmetic, and food ingredient. This easily replaceable oil has innumerable deadly and irreversible side effects, such as greenhouse gas emissions, drastic deforestation consequences, and horrible living and working conditions for palm oil laborers, as seen in the Pulitzer Center article, No Man's Land, by Zaisha Cruz-Bacani. Cruz-Bacani's article has heartbreaking personal accounts with irrefutable evidence of the damaging effects that palm oil has, not just on the maltreated Indonesian workers, but on the international climate as well. There are many families in Indonesia working all day and making only $4.75 a week, while their land is forcibly reduced to a smog-filled hellscape, devoid of even clear water or air. People are hesitant to cut ties with this multi-billion-dollar industry because, unsurprisingly, mankind continues to choose temporary riches over ecological lives.
Thank you, Joya. And we're already seeing some details popping up for us in the chat. I'm curious, from this paragraph, what is Isabel trying to do to start off her letter? Is she, one, creating an argument for action? Is she, two, summarizing a news story and explaining the issue? Or is she, three, making a local or personal connection? So let me launch a quick poll here. And let's see. All right. And I can go back actually to the paragraph. So what do you think Isabel's trying to do in this first paragraph? I see some responses coming in. Maybe we'll wait 5 more seconds to make our guesses. All right, I'll close this poll in 3, 2, and 1. And it looks like we are seeing 2 parts of the contest happening in this first paragraph. An argument for action and a local or personal connection. Now, actually, when I look through this, one thing I do notice that Isabel is doing in this part of her letter is she actually references the article by name and some of the details. So I would also argue that she is starting to summarize the issue here. But one thing I agree with you all that she's doing is she's already planting the seeds for that argument. Let's take a look at the second paragraph and see what she is doing here. Let me see, Carletta, I'm gonna change your setting here. All right, are you able to unmute?
I did.
Excellent.
I apologize for my southern drawl ahead of time.
It is welcome here. We are happy you're here.
This issue is important to Ohio. Okay, so it's a letter from Isabella Colith, and written in response to the story Climate Change and Human Trafficking in Indonesia. This issue is important to Ohio because we as the consumers of palm oil are renewing the industry by ensuring constant demand for this destructive import. If everyone in their own community took the time to care about palm oil, we could collectively destroy the industry at its base. Change starts locally, and then it becomes a movement. We, the community, should care about this world, and we should care about the heartbreaking violations against human rights. It may seem that my writing to you is futile and immature in its expectations, but to lay down and accept such a fate would be to lay down and accept death. Okay, girl. Stopping palm oil matters because ending climate change matters. Stopping palm oil matters because our forests and animals matter. Stopping palm oil matters because human lives matter.
Thank you so much. And some strong statements here from Isabel.
Yes.
Do you think that in this case she is arguing for action? Is she summarizing the story, or is she trying to make that connection, trying to make it personal? And let's relaunch our poll here.
No, it's all about action. Oh, sorry.
So we're thinking maybe it's an argument for action. All right, I'll close our poll in 3, 2. Let me go back to the text so you can see it. All right, let's take a look. So many of us agree she is arguing for action, but it looks like part of that is summarizing the story. So that's integrated here. And I would argue too, just looking at that first sentence, she says the issue is important to Ohio because, and goes on to explain why the senator from Ohio should care about this. So I think she might be kind of taking this in order, starting with the issue, the summary, going into the connection. And if that's true, let's take a look at the end of the letter here. My prediction is that we're going to see what she wants the senator to do, what action she wants the senator to take. Is there anyone else who would be willing to unmute and read for us? You can just let me know in the chat. Awesome. Thank you, Monica.
Okay. Palm oil is not essential, nor is it unique in its ability, I believe is what it's supposed to say.
Yes.
And many companies have begun replacing palm oil with other less harmful alternatives. We must raise awareness of this issue by pressuring companies and consumers to stop using palm oil products. Prices of palm oil have been rising with the Indonesian and Malaysian biofuel mandate, so the time to act is now. In 2011, the Australian Parliament passed the Food Standards Amendment, stating that palm oil must be specifically labeled on foods. This may not seem like a profound change. However, with campaigns against the use of palm oil as well, consumers could make informed choices against a formerly dominating industry. I urge you to push anti-palm oil legislation and to similarly force companies to advertise their use of palm oil while raising awareness for this issue to the public. With widespread knowledge of this issue, citizens are more informed and can choose to be compassionate in their decision-making. This may seem like a depressingly mild solution to such a long-running problem. However, realistically, I believe that we must work smartly and diligently to find the best solution possible. I ask you, will you stand on the side of history that killed the earth for a bar of soap, or will you take action? Sincerely, Isabel Coley.
Thank you so much. So let's see, do we think in this case, is she moving into that argument for action, or do we think well, you tell me, what element of the contest do you think Isabel is closing with here? Pretty strong statement for her, for her ending here. So I'll put that back on the screen. Yeah, I think we've pretty much picked up on it here. I'll close this in 3, 2, 1. And we're pretty unanimous here. This is our argument for action. What I'd love to know is in the chat, let me know, or for those of you who can unmute or would like to, please unmute. Let me know, what is it that you thought Isabel does well in this letter that maybe we would want to share with our students? I love Carletta mentions that it closes that "where do you stand?" that challenge to the senator. Is there another element of this letter? I'll go back at least to the last paragraph that you think is a skill we'd want our students to try.
I think she was very clear and succinct in the parts that I read about the comparison of like why it's bad, right? She gave some really strong, like those last 4 sentences. It matters because of this. It matters because of, so if you didn't know why it matters, these are the reasons it matters. And I think if you're someone reading a letter, a senator or principal, whomever, at least you can pull out and say, okay, this is where she stands. And if I can make a change, then it might be somewhere in there. And I think the latter part of the letter, again, makes some very clear, definitive things that we can do. And I think that's important for young people in helping solve a problem, trying to identify one thing, even like you said, it's small to put what's in the label, but it can make a big difference. And I think if we start there, then it's sometimes more attainable than trying to do a whole lot when one little thing can really make a difference.
Thank you. So appreciate that and completely agree. Sarah agrees and says you can feel the passion, but she supports it with examples, makes concrete connections, and has a clear call to action. I was going to add to that, just also even in that first paragraph, the way that she cites the story, and I would even encourage her to include the news outlet, I think can support her argument and demonstrate that she's done that research. I completely agree with you, Tarika. The data, yes, mentions Carletta. Wonderful. So this is what is possible in this contest. But what is also important is that students are identifying an issue they care about. So this was a story that Isabel identified, but your students might want to try something else. We want to show you 2 ways that they can start to look for reporting. The first thing is if you go to our website, specifically to the link pulitzercenter.org/reporting, and put it in the chat as well, this is what you'll see. A window will pop up that is going to take you to all the reporting that we've supported. The most recently published stories from a project we supported will be at the top. So it looks like this story was about palm oil, was published today in Manga Bay. Over the weekend, it looks like we had stories about activists in the Amazon rainforest, the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I know that this story is focused in Venezuela, stories about the coronavirus. This is about the experience of children in Germany going back to school. However, if your students want to filter through some of this reporting, they can click on Show Advanced, like I did just then, and they can search by issue. They can also search by media type. Do they want to read an article? Do they want to look at a photo story or a video? They can also highlight a different region or country to focus in. So I'm curious just for the group here, I know when we did our poll earlier, a lot of us were interested in the issue of racial justice. Maybe you could let me know in the chat where you're at in your brain at 4:38 on a Tuesday. Is there a country or region you'd be interested in looking at, or is there a media type you would want to explore around the theme of racial justice? Okay, so we're going to see Treka suggests Nigeria. Carletta suggests Seattle. I'm going to start with Nigeria and see what we come up with here. And unfortunately, it looks like the issue and the country together didn't pop up with a story for this one. But say if we were to, be open to many issues in Nigeria, we would see all of these different stories popping up. Students could scroll through the photos and the headlines there. I also saw Carletta mentioned Seattle. We could see if there were any stories with Seattle in the headline just by searching that keyword. And it looks like these are some of the stories that connect to Seattle. And Tareka mentions the SARS movement. I've heard in some student workshops, several students mentioning that. So we're going to see if that one pulls up a story for us. Yeah. So this one's talking about the SARS, the virus, which I think isn't what we're talking about in Nigeria. So unfortunately, it looks like I know that's funny, on our site, we're not seeing that specific issue getting covered yet. Hopefully it will, definitely an underreported story. But I'll say, for example, if I were to just start with the racial justice issue that we spoke about, South Africa. Maybe we could see if we put racial justice in South Africa, what we come up with. And also not a story tagged to that, but many stories in both of those regions and about racial justice. I do see here, for example, though, these are all the stories that have been tagged to the racial justice theme. So it looks like what I would even do is I would start to see if I, for example, want to differentiate for my students. I often filter by photo. So I know that there's a photo story attached with captions. And we can see a stream of stories here that students can scroll through and just notice what's interesting to them. Another thing that students can do is if they go to the contest page, which was shared in the chat earlier. Let me just go back here. We've actually highlighted some stories by grade level to help point students to some stories that might be interesting to them, but also be at their grade level. So this is, actually, let me just take you to that page so you can see it. You'll scroll past the contest guidelines, which include, by the way, everything we've seen so far, but also the Google form that students will use to submit their letters. That's also embedded in that page. And then below, you'll see a list of stories that students could be choosing from, sort of isolated by grade level. And we tried to represent several of the issues within each of these lists. So now I thought we could do, I know we have a variety of grade levels on the call today. So I pulled up the list that's listed for elementary, but ideally interesting for all grade levels. And I was curious of, with just these headlines and knowing what media they represent or are embedded within these headlines, which of these stories might you want to explore for 5 minutes together? We have Holding On to Hope at the US-Mexico border, how schools in Brazil are teaching kids to eat their vegetables, children of the incarcerated. In Syria, all girls want is safety in school. Exotic pets in China fueling biodiversity loss. No hands-on, no field trips, about the Riverfront Museum, and a threat to Cambodia's sacred forests. All right, let's give this 3, 2. Oh, there is a tie, pretty close to a tie here. We might have to take a sneak peek at 2 of these. I'll go ahead and close our poll in 3, 2, wondering if we'll get a deciding vote in 1. And we've got a tie. It looks like the group on the call today is interested in looking at the US-Mexico border and also the piece on children of the incarcerated. So let's take a quick glimpse at both. So what we have here is we start with a photo and a caption, and then I say we read, let's go ahead and just read the intro text here. Joya, can you read that text for us? And as a group, let's use the chat to try to identify what is the issue that is being talked about here. And if you already have it, what is a connection you think you could make to this story?
Tijuana, Mexico. On a child's first day at the Yes We Can World Foundation School, he or she gets 2 t-shirts new shoes, and a backpack filled with school supplies. The school is for migrant kids from Central America and Mexico. They've left their homes and traveled with family to legally ask for asylum in the US. But the US has a new policy called the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP. It says Central Americans must stay in Mexico as their cases are decided in US immigration court. In the past, they could wait in the US. MPP doesn't apply to Mexicans. They stay in Mexico too, but are put on a waiting list to ask for asylum. Now, thousands of asylum seekers are stuck in Tijuana and other Mexican cities along the southwestern US border. People are working to help them as they wait.
And we have an opening photo with the caption that reads, "Teacher Sandra Rodriguez greets students at the Yes We Can World Foundation School in Tijuana, Mexico on October 3rd. I'm just going to scroll through here to that map that was discussed. Excellent. And I'll go ahead and read the closing here, which says, at least 900,000 migrants have come to the US-Mexico border since October 2018. The US government calls it a humanitarian and security crisis. In response, the US has created the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP. The government says it will help restore a safe and orderly immigration process. It says Mexico will provide migrants with humanitarian protections. Since MPP began in January, more than 50,000 migrants have been made to wait in Mexico. But Human Rights Watch says MPP, often called Remain in Mexico, puts people at risk. In Tijuana and other Mexican border towns, crime is common. Migrants report being kidnapped or robbed. Waiting in Mexico also makes it hard for migrants to meet with US lawyers and know their rights. What's really going to make a difference in an asylum seeker's case is good legal representation, says Leah Bush of Jewish Family Service of San Diego. Last year, the group helped more than 17,000 asylum seekers. So I'm going to mute for a moment. Joya, let me know, what do we see in the chat? How would you describe the issue that's covered in this reporting project, and why might it matter to us? Well, maybe while we're brainstorming in the chat, thinking about it, Joya, what about you? What is sticking out to you? What's the issue here?
Issue, well, I always go with who, what, when, where, why. That's how I usually develop or formulate that. So I know that from what I'm reading, the issue seems to be that people who are looking to come into the US are at risk while waiting outside the US for asylum. And that process is taxing for them. And so this article seems to explore that experience. In the chat, we also have Tarika, who's shared "A Vulnerable Community is in Limbo." That would be a great title for this. Navigating the process of seeking asylum in the US from Brittany. These are also great ways to summarize this article.
And I'm curious, I think on the call we have educators representing different parts of the US and the world. How does this issue or this story connect to you and your communities? I know one thing I might notice right off the bat from this picture is this image looked very similar to images that I see when I'm walking by the school 2 blocks from here, when the school year is in session and we're not, and when we're not learning from home. So I can relate to the fact that actually that I can relate here in DC right now, there are students who are unable to go to schools like they're used to, just like these kids are probably not able to go to the schools like they're used to.
I also know that many of our students reflect some of the same backgrounds or have had similar stories of migration. And so there is a visceral connection to that journey and that experience, and perhaps comparing and contrasting those journeys could be a place of connection for both teachers and students who are evaluating this text.
Can I say Coatis, who I hope I'm saying that correctly here in the chat, I think has the closing line for our letter. What will the world community do to support the issue of asylum? Which really gets to that action and the question being asked here. So we've started to make some personal connections here. And the last thing we would do is we would propose what we think should be done about it. I would say here in DC, if the connection I'm making is that I'm also in a place where a lot of students aren't able to get to school safely because of a policy, maybe something that I would do is make a suggestion about what I think should be done to help get kids able to be in school right now in a safe way. And I have to think about who I would write that letter to and what that policy would be. Joy, do you see an action that you would want to take based on this story?
I think the part that feels like it's actionable is how do we support vulnerable communities in our own community? How do we support vulnerable people in our own community? And how can we support students and people who are seeking asylum? So there are so many spaces where people are waiting on that process, and we could do that. We could use that experience and that connection to start supporting those people. So maybe it's something like a book drive. Maybe it's something like sending supplies. But certainly it would be a really fun and exciting brainstorm on ways that we can support people that are waiting on this process to work for them.
And now I'm remembering that many of us were also interested in this story, also from Time for Kids, about children of the incarcerated. That was the name of the project. I know Carletta, Monica, since maybe you're Sarah, could one of you be interested in unmuting to read the opening 2 paragraphs of this story?
I will.
Thank you, Monica.
Folsom, California, right there.
Yes.
Okay, I gotta get it a little bit bigger. Okay. Most kids are sound asleep at 2:45 in the morning, but on a Saturday this past summer, 2 sisters were up way past their bedtime. They were waiting for a bus. When it pulled up outside St. Columba Church in Oakland, the girls jumped out of the SUV they were waiting in. They darted across the parking lot and confidently climbed aboard. Their great-grandmother Ruby was right behind them. I went along for the ride, too. Pikachu, my angel 6, said when I asked about her yellow pajamas. Ruby smiled. Pikachu is a cartoon, she told me.
Actually, could you continue with the next 2 sections so
Sure.
we'll get to the
All right. Mael, 8, had more to say, and she said it in what seemed like a single breath. I am a zebra with a bunch of stars, and my pajamas have pockets and a hood with ears. The girls were full of nervous energy. That's because they were on their way to visit their mom, Denisha, in prison through a special program called Get on the Bus. Wow. Keep going.
Why don't we read the next 2 sentences and just at this point, jump in the chat and let us know what's the issue that you're identifying. But yes, Monica, if you could read the next 2 sentences, I think.
Okay. Family time. When a person is found guilty of breaking the law, he or she can be sent to jail or prison. Jail is usually for a shorter sentence, while prison is for a longer sentence. In the United States, about 2.7 million children have a parent in jail or prison, according to a report from the Pew Charitable Trust. That's 1 in 28 kids. Wow.
Thank you so much. And let's take a look in the chat. I mean, I think we've, yeah, I think we've heard the issue named here.
So it seems like many attendees for READ are sharing connections with the content. I'd love to share some of them with you. So Carlotta has said, the problem is real for many of our students. In DC, it's even worse because when DC residents are sentenced, they can be sent anywhere in the country, making it nearly impossible for family and friends to visit. And then there seems to be a lot of agreement with that. So these visits aren't even possible, says Carletta. This is very sensitive to me, says Melissa. I have a lot of students whose parents are incarcerated. Thank you for sharing that, Melissa. Maybe this article might be something that you want to explore in your classroom. Tarika shared 1 in 28 kids. Oh my God. So that detail was resonant for them. And Brittany is sharing anxiety children feel when they're going to visit an incarcerated parent processing trauma. So those are just some of the connections that our attendees are feeling with this particular text.
Carletta mentions many students also have traumatic relationships with law enforcement and may be afraid to visit a parent. And it kind of connects also another issue that comes up in the next sentence after what Monica was reading for us is experts say that visiting a parent who's incarcerated can have a positive effect on a child, but prisons are often far from where families live and travel can be expensive. So we've identified the issue of distrust of law enforcement, the feeling that trauma or that challenge emotionally for children who are visiting parents. We've also identified the issue of the distance it can take to travel to see parents. I'm curious, with this story, if a student were exploring this, I'm seeing in the chat that many might relate to this issue personally. I know one thing I connected with is just seeing that 1 in 28 number. I just thought of a classroom. I thought of what if I were sitting in the lunchroom, you know, or even on my block, thinking about this might directly connect to somebody who either, you know, myself or somebody in the room or on the block with me. What is it, based on what you've seen so far and a connection you're feeling right now to this story, what action do you think a member of elected office could take to combat one of these issues? And who might you write a letter to? Let us know in the chat. Great. I love the way Carletta, I feel like you're modeling how I would ask students to look for details in the story. Like, these are great questions that I believe Jamie goes into a little in this story. But I see that this might have to do with law enforcement. So that maybe there are many elected officials, right, who connect to law enforcement. I hadn't thought about that. That's a great idea to write to one of those people. Sarah suggests the idea of video calls, more support for video calls. And Melissa says maybe we could write to a state representative about that. Sarah mentions advocating for better reentry programs to reduce incarceration. Carlotta mentions more access to law schools, or writing to the governor to set up conference calls, more local places for calls. Writing to judges, that's a really good idea. Carlotta, yeah, it advocates for a review of how cases are decided and how do we reduce sentences. Excellent. So this is, and actually one of our winners 1 year wrote about this piece. So in our follow-up, I'm going to find that letter and share it with you. So that, excellent. Gosh, this chat is amazing. We have to save this. So essentially we have just done what our students would be doing to complete their letters. Before we show you some other ways that we might be able to connect, just wanted to pause for a moment. Are there any questions about the contest or about anything we've covered so far today? If you'd like to ask your question out loud, just let me know in the chat and I can change the audio for you to unmute.
One question in the Q&A, Fareed, is whether the PowerPoint will be available.
Yes, and we'll get that out to you tomorrow. Also, if anyone on the call today wants to have a staff member join their class this week or early next week to facilitate this workshop, we could do that as well. I hope so, Tarek. I love what you're sharing here. So many students would flourish with this idea and a place to find the information. Yes. Well, we hope that you will share this contest with your students. I'm going to go ahead and add it to the chat one more time.
I want to echo something that, I'm so sorry, Frida, I don't mean to cut you off. I want to echo something that Sarah is saying, that this is a powerful lesson to elevate student voice, even if it's not for the contest. So although our contest is coming up, the workshop is available year round, as are the student examples and the template. So if you don't do this for the contest, it's still a really powerful and exciting learning tool to get students interested in news articles, to make connections, and to learn how to advocate for change.
Absolutely. Excellent. Yes, I will. Yes, I will get that out to you by tomorrow morning at the latest. So we also have a flyer that you can share with your classes that I will put in the email. I was gonna see if I could put it in the chat, but I cannot. However, one thing that is really exciting is, again, all this information, including where students submit, is online. A lot of teachers actually have sent their students letters as a batch to us as well. So if that makes more sense to you, we can do that. And yes, we'll send that over email. I also wanted to let you know that today is the start of a series of webinars with the Washington Teachers Union. I also wanted to make you aware that we do public webinars and webinars for educators throughout the year. So there's one of each here on the screen. On the left, on Tuesday of next week, we're going to be joined by Christina Sneed, a high school instructional coach and educator from St. Louis, who's going to talk to us about how she made connections between the New York Times Magazine 1619 project and a local publication, Gateway Journalism Review's 1857 project, to discuss the history of race in St. Louis, racism and injustice. Also, then the next day, I'll be back with Sarah and joined by Zawadi Morris to talk about how she used video, photography, and interview and writing to capture many voices throughout Brooklyn to examine the impact of the coronavirus on the community there. And that was actually inspired by the Freedom Writers Project that was conducted here in the US in the early 20th century. The next webinar that we'll focus on with Washington Teachers Union is with Dr. Sima Yasmin, who is a journalist and poet and epidemiologist, who's going to join us to talk about her experience covering the coronavirus pandemic and specifically give us some tips on how to navigate misinformation and disinformation. And that's all we have for today. So thank you all so much for joining us. When this session closes, you will see a very short survey. I'm going to put it in the chat here as well. And then you'll see an email tomorrow with all the resources that were shared today. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope everyone takes care. And if you'd like to close by dropping a goodbye, a thank you, anything that's sticking with you in the chat, we'd love to hear your voices as we close out. So thank you so much. Anything before we close, Sarah, Joya?
No, it was such a pleasure to work with you guys today. And I hope that this is a successful initiative in your classrooms. We'd love to hear from you if it goes well.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. I'll go ahead and close our session, and you'll see the survey pop up right as it closes. Take care, and we look forward to collaborating with you. Bye-bye.